All right, everyone. We're so glad to see all of you here today. A few of you are new with us. Most of you are not. And the one thing I want to say is we're going to do things a little bit different because our group is growing more. There's two things actually we're going to do different. I just want to say on the top end is one, we're going to be moving the time around. So pay close attention. All of you obviously did because you're now here an hour earlier than we normally meet. And but just so we can accommodate more people in more time zones. The second thing is we have traditionally run this in that we ask about everybody's what's your hot topic, and then we try to amalgamate. As our group grows, that's not going to be possible, as well as the individual introductions for the networking. So here's our request. First thing, relative to the introductions, is that I would request each of you to put your name, where you're from, and if you like, your email address, as well as if you have a practice focus. So that you can just see that and review it, and I'll leave it up. We'll leave it up to you guys if you want to connect. You know, somebody might say, hey, I really liked what Jennifer had to say today. I want to reach out to her. We've got this in common. All right, so we'll do the introductions that way. The second thing is that we are going to start introducing themes to this versus the amalgamation. And today what we're going to do is we chose a theme based on what has now historically become our most popular podcast, which also Mary brought up last time we met last month, was the podcast we did on brief. I don't know how many of you were able to listen to that. It's based on a book by Joseph McCormick, and the book is entitled Brief. I think it's How to Say, I wrote it down, How to Say Less with More Impact. And so much in that book, and when I heard about this book a couple of years ago, I realized this is exactly what we're trying to get across in coaching when we teach coaches about language, is to be succinct, to be intentional with our language. And our language is essentially, you know, if we were surgeons, it would be our scalpel and all our other tools, right, that we perform surgery with, is our language. And so what we want to do is kind of go through what we talked about in the podcast, or what Ilias did. A chef kiss to Ilias, who does such a great job with our podcast. But he, in his book, in McCormick's book, he brings up 7 reasons we're not brief with our language, and we'd like to introduce those topics into this classroom today, or this group, this discussion. We're not going to be sitting here teaching you about this. What we want is your input, your experiences, your thoughts, your questions around this. All right. So I want to first open up, because Mary was the one who brought this up. Mary, what intrigued you about this topic when you heard the podcast?
I loved it. It's my favorite one so far. I like them all, Ilias, and Amy, because you feature too. But this one in particular, because it is really that challenge of less is more.
Yeah.
And as I listened, then I took a note and I thought, all right, I'm asking Ilias this. How can I simplify my thinking in the moment while maintaining presence and being client-centered? So I think it's a bigger challenge to be able to, it's harder to be really tight and concise and not be like react to something and respond and here's 3 sentences. It's much harder. But then also doing that, and I'll add another C, that the constraint in coaching, the constraint, discipline constraint for ourselves to, again, maintain our presence, be very focused on client, but then getting really tight in a response to something. That's the dilemma.
Yeah. Constraint, that's an interesting word to throw in the mix here with the other 7. Hi, Ophelia. Welcome. All right. Anybody relating to this? Okay. Yeah, and that's a great question, Mary. And so this came up for us as a topic because when we are assessing coaches, and at least too, and we're doing, practicums and things like that, we hear a lot of excessive language. It's almost one of the primary things that we do corrections on all the time is excessive language. And what's so interesting to me in doing that is I hear people be one way when they're coaching, and then when they're done coaching, they're another way with their language. Right? They just talk normal. And so just like we're talking right now. And it's always interesting to me in mentoring coaches that I hear this duality where, first of all, you'll hear people in their coaching contextualizing why they're asking the question. And then this word salad question comes out, right? Or they're so busy trying to formulate the right question that it either comes off with excessive language, but it's not what they really want to ask, right? They're trying to ask it in a way that's just right. And so am I speaking to the constraint part, Mary, when I say that? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And just the word salad is perfect, analogy, Amy. Just, going on that too much, whether it's filler or not, or it just doesn't move the client forward in any way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably, there's probably some good points that a coach is making, but then again, how do you reduce that?
And that's the question for me, like the question for everyone here. Why do we say that coaches need to be mindful of language and brief?
Anyone want to tackle that one?
Well, we take focus away from the client when we speak too much, like, that we're shining the light on ourselves. And I think there's this, and I struggle with this terribly. There's an analogy that when my son was learning to play saxophone, there was a difference between sliding into the note and tonguing the note, like just on point, and I catch myself sliding into the point I want to make.
Interesting.
So the focus is here, right?
Yeah.
I have a comment to that, or a response, is that, there's this marriage, like we're all talking about. We've got our acumen and our discipline, and we want to move the client forward. So I'm looking for a reaction from the client to see that he or she is moving forward. And that's usually, so we all are probably intuitive and we can, read a room, etc. So maybe that's one of the things that I do with my word salad, is that I don't know what category you want to label it to. So impatience, this, I don't care what adjective we use, but I think that's what it is I'm astutely aware that I need to listen, I need to let them do the work, and I need to move them, or, the goal is to move them into this action or awareness. So in my questions, I'm looking for some reaction from them. And sometimes it's the opposite, it's negative, it's blank, it's whatever, and that makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, thanks for that honesty, David.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I mean, it always leads back to us.
Yeah.
when we're starting to play around with this and struggle with it or whatever. What's coming up for some of the rest of you?
I will hop on the discomfort, what I heard at the end of your statement, David. When I think about what makes me most uncomfortable that will lead to the word salad, it's when the client is not introspective enough. I mean enough, I know we're not, it's a judgment call, enough, but like when they've signed up to be present, but really struggle to sort of pinpoint, like, I don't know, I really don't know what I'm doing here, is the vibe, right? That's where the discomfort kicks in for me.
Yeah.
There are times where if someone is willing to be introspective but doesn't know why they're there, easy, much easier. You can get there.
Yeah.
When they when they don't have either yet, that's where the word salad kicks in for me.
And then because the client is not doing the work, then we start paddling, right?
Mhm.
Yeah,
And I would add, there are times where that client isn't the one who's paid for it, right? So
Yeah.
it's not like I can be like, well, we can end it, you know? I mean, I guess I could, but I'm accountable to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
I was about to ask David if it was, if they're sponsored, they're being asked to go through coaching versus coming to you privately one-on-one, because I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about one scenario. I'm just zeroing in on one scenario to think about the example. There's a person who's in the room with me who is on board. They're not paying. The organization is paying. They're on board, but they're not coming at it from a place of deep insecurity or a deep need for growth. They're like, "Hey, I'm up for learning. What you got?" You know?
yeah. Yeah. I see a lot of head nodding here.
And David, I'm in this, most of my clients are sponsored. And that, yeah, what do you have for me today? But I actually am starting to think that that's a cover. And do you know, I don't know if you know what I mean, but that they don't trust me yet to really tell me what they fear or what they want to accomplish that they're not. So to me, that's where I'm starting to go with it is I'm thinking, okay. And yesterday I thought, feeding a squirrel, be still. So
The squirrel piece, I love that.
Can I add on to that too? Because David, thank you for that. And I think it was Jennifer. So I'm afraid the squirrel's going to run away since we're using this analogy. Not oh, I won't have a client. That's not what I mean. I just mean, so what do you do, to David's point, when you have a client paid, whether it's sponsored or not, and it requires a la Elias, the client does the work and I subscribe to that. But if the client's not doing the work, now I think there's I won't anticipate your answers, but what do you do when the client isn't doing the work? And if you just say, well, maybe you should just terminate it, I will put that in my little book of things to do. But I'm guessing there's a broader answer. Because that's where I get, I can be still. I've done it. I can do some of the things that you've said, but there's a point where you're trying to feed the squirrel and no food is transmitted and the squirrel goes away hungry. And I feel accountable for that.
And there is always the moment, and I've done that many times, when we ask the client, so what are we here for? How committed are you to this work?
Yeah, I haven't arrived there yet. That feels a little hostile to me, and I'm aggressive, so I haven't tried that yet because
Well, coaching is challenging.
Yeah, fair.
And this is a theme I'm hearing between all of your words here, is that you're not quite sure how edgy to get yet.
And because of that, then the language gets convoluted.
Yeah.
We're paddling. We are trying to make things work. We are making arrangements for the client. We are trying to convince the client. We're trying to bring the client on board. And the way we do this is to make our language more complex.
And this goes back to the brief, succinct language, because we're talking about developing trust, right? Early on, getting that trust established, getting the client enrolled in the process, even if they're sponsored and they're kind of like, hey, what are you going to do for me today? It's our job to make that connection, that connection that bonds us through trust. And I have found personally the best way to do it is plain talk. Just talk plain. Because they get enough of that BS at work with all the double speak, the corporate speak, do they really mean this, or did they said that? I want to be a haven for them to come to to say what's really going on for them. And I'm going to do the same in plain talk.
And what
So
hap-
you're Amy, coach, keeping it real.
yeah.
Totally.
What happens if we start paddling? What happens to the client?
Well, they're directionless. I mean, I think, you know, they're like, where are you taking me? Or are we they're more confused than where we began.
The more we paddle, the less work they're going to do.
Yep.
I want to ask you, Amy, to follow up on the plain talk.
Yeah.
Can you provide an example of some early in the session plain talk that you might use?
They may be trying to tell me about a dynamic, maybe with their boss or something. Well, I'm going to go all the way back to the coaching agreement. For any of you who've been educated by me, you know, my rules in a sponsored situation is once I engage with a client, that's it. No more conversations with the sponsors or stakeholders. It's me, the client, and anyone else who wants to talk. That's the foundation of trust, first of all. But the plain talk starts with, they may be trying to explain a sticky, tricky dynamic between maybe their boss or coworkers or whatever it is. And it's to not take it in, what am I looking for? In a way that's antiseptic and clinical, like, oh, tell me more about it. It's like, hey, what's up with that, do you think? That's plain talk. That's how I would talk to my friend. Yet I'm being extremely intentional with my words, and I'm being deliberate in my language. And so, but it's in how I would talk to anybody in any situation. And I think what I see and what Ilya sees when we assess and listen to people's recordings is we have one experience of people in plain talk, and then they go and they do coaching and start the word salads.
I think that there is more here too, that, you know, when we are in conversation with our friends, we don't feel in a social setting, there isn't as much as the need to paddle or the need to convince or the need to explain on all of this. But we also need to be mindful that when we are in a social setting, the spotlight goes back and forth between both people involved. We are there. It's my time to talk. It's your time to talk. We are exchanging. In coaching, the spotlight is always on the client. It's the client's time. So it's not my turn. I'm there to support the process that is happening there. So I speak to support the process there, not because I need to make a point. So what is enough just to let the ball roll?
Or what is the least amount to let the ball roll would probably be more appropriate.
And I want to make one more point here. This book that we based this podcast on is not talking about coaching at all. He is talking about communication, period. How often when we are in conversations or when we are having any explanation, we take the microphone and all of a sudden our language is much more complex than necessary. What is the point that we want to make? And that's why he has those 7 reasons why we end up not being brief. And I love them, right? Cowardice is the first one.
Don't tell them all, because I'm going to go through them in a minute.
Oh, you're going to go through.
Yeah.
But by the way, all of the words starts with C. That's why he has some words that are quite strong.
And I want to go back to my comment about how you would talk to a friend. Where that comes from, why I'm saying that is coaching, the dynamic of coaching should feel like peer to peer, shoulder to shoulder. That's why the plain speak is so important. And yet it feels peer to peer And yet we're coaching and being very intentional with all the things that Ilya said. Right. And language has a lot to do with that, and the succinctness of language. Shall we go through the C's? Because this is from the brief book by Joseph McCormick again. And he's got 7 C's, and I love Mary added an 8th one today, which I love. The first one that he talks about is cowardice. And essentially what he says is we're getting up in our own head, right? And then we're trying to deliver a message and ask a question, and it all becomes complex because we're afraid or held back by asking what we really want to ask. That's the edginess, you guys. What do you really want to ask here? Go right to it. Don't
we
fluff
start
it.
trying to sugarcoat it. And we start putting words here. And then in the sugarcoating, the language starts growing.
Yeah. And this is hard because sometimes our questions are going to hit people right between the eyes. But when you've established enough trust with all the other conditions we talk about in the competencies, when you've established trust, you can pretty much say anything to anyone because they know in their hearts you are on their side, you are in their camp. And this is coming from a place of wanting for, which is a really important term, wanting for them, not for me, for them.
What do you
And-
guys think of this first word?
Cowardice.
The way you framed it, or the book frames it, or both, you said, what do you really want to ask? That assumes that right now you want to ask something. Sometimes the coachee is in a place where, you know, obviously we want to avoid telling if at all possible, or whatever it is, but I don't know. It stands to make you question your own motivation in a moment and what you think might be most useful for that client, and just trying to stay curious even longer,
Mhm.
and moving to what do I want to ask? What don't I know? As opposed to, gosh, they just said something that was, you know, or they're not saying something. Say the thing is what I want to say, you know, but it's, yeah. So anyway, what do you want to ask is a really good question for a number of reasons.
Yeah, that's great, Joe. That's a great observation.
And that goes back to what Mary brought up at the beginning of the conversation. Mary was saying, like, how to be succinct in the moment.
Mhm.
Right? This is one of the things that we say, especially, and we observe this at MCC level coaching, is the level of pause, is not to be afraid to stop. Before we open our mouth, we are clear. We give ourselves the time to become clear. What is the question that I want to ask? What is the appropriate comment that I'm going to make right now? What is it that I truly want to say? And give ourselves that time.
Yeah.
Slow down.
Can I make a comment here? This is Cindy. I think some of it too comes from the client that you're working with, because some clients are verbal processors, and so they got to talk it through. And so us being able to be at that place where we can ask that question right at the right time, I think sometimes can kind of jump through a whole lot of that processing, but maybe not. It might be sometimes that they still need to get through that piece.
Well, I always say there's, some, verbal processors, it depends, right? There are some verbal processors that you would just need to keep up with them, right? There are some verbal processors that the best thing to do is to slow down. And as we slow down, then they start slowing down as well, because we're not matching their energy, right? And I think that it's completely appropriate to say, wait, 1 second here. I need to process what you said. And in doing that, we are supporting them to process what they were saying. And like, put the brakes and, okay, I have a question here for you. And hold that space. And then we are holding the space for them. We are holding the space for us. And then we ask the question.
Yeah.
That can be powerful to a verbal processor.
Yes. And I think you do a great job with that. When you speak with anyone, your tone really makes a big difference. So I always feel like you and I are best friends. Now, we may or may not be if we ever really were in the same circle, but I think you're a fantastic person, and I believe you feel that way about me. I think anyone that would speak with you feels that way. And so I think that trust is already established from how you do your coaching, but your tone on top of it, of how you do that, how you say it, makes a difference as well. It allows, as a coach, as a person being coached, to be able to hear and be able to be a little bit more vulnerable and be able to get past some of the things that might take a little bit longer.
Great points.
Here comes the trust again. I love that.
Ilias, I love what you just, how you gave us a good way of tapping the brakes. Wait. I'd love to ask a question. I have found I'm no expert on this by any means, but communication patterns have changed a lot. And I happen to work with a student group that are 20 and 30 somethings, and they speak in paragraphs. They don't speak in sentences. And so that point of they just downloaded 2 paragraphs and they went in 7 different directions. And I love the approach, and I'm going to do it tomorrow.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong to ask the client, like, what is the summary of what you just said right now? I have asked clients, like, how can you express what you just said in 2 sentences? I've asked clients this.
What are you really saying here?
Yeah, and that makes them, oh, this is the crux of the matter.
They're doing the work, notice, in what he's saying, not you figuring it all out.
I think it is that it's, what actually is your real question here? What is really going on? And it's interesting what you said about paragraphs, because there's so much communication now is in short sort of text, WhatsApp, whatever. So I find that really fascinating, Mary, that there's some people the opposite end of the spectrum. But and I think there are times when we're thinking of posing, what's a brilliant question, but actually some of the short, may feel a little bit formulaic questions can be the most powerful at the right time, and as Cindy said, the right tone. It's a okay, I'm going to really think about that now, as far as the client's concerned.
Yeah. And do you hear the succinctness, though, of what both of you are saying, Mary and Claire, what you're saying here? Those are really succinct questions.
Have you also noticed that here in this conversation, we have become more succinct since the beginning of our call?
It's like magic. Shall I go into the next one here? Okay. The next C that he has is confidence. And it's actually what he terms as overconfidence. I am the expert here, and I have a lot to say and a lot to ask. And who's that about?
Oh, that's a major one.
But it also is, and I'm not saying, these are because everybody's egotistical or whatever. It's this need to perform and show your worth and your value.
It's interesting because the point here, confidence, and he is making the point of overconfidence. But if we look at underneath that, what is really happening is lack of confidence. We need to overcompensate by showing that we are of value. And then we start adding words just to prove to the other person that we have value in what we are saying.
Anybody relating to this? You don't have to out yourselves.
I'll out.
But yeah, it's a human thing, right? And especially, and I'll tell you what's the difference between Elise and I and some of you is we have years and years of evidence that we don't need to do that it works out much better without it. It's a matter of building that muscle as a coach to not go there, to not feel like you have to demonstrate that value.
I love the word muscle because that's what it feels like. And you referred to discipline earlier, and somebody brought up something super traumatic in a session earlier this week, and I'd had the exact same thing in my life, and every instinct in me was to connect, maybe not to show off, although maybe that a hidden agenda I had, but I know that happened. You can trust me. And I had to find and I told myself, if you still feel like you have to say this in 3 minutes, like I had to give myself, like, if you still feel compelled in 3 minutes, then you can. And by 3 minutes, I had regained, like, no, I can show, I don't have to tell. Just trust that experience inside me is doing something. Like, it was hard. It felt like a workout. So
And
muscles.
that's the discernment piece, Jennifer, that we discern in the moment. It's not inappropriate to, we teach a lot about this in our level 2 program. It's not inappropriate to share that you have shared that experience. It's how you do it and how it keeps the spotlight on the client versus you when you do it. And so it's being able to find that appropriate ground when you do that. So, but best off to keep developing that muscle until you find that sweet spot. So,
and Jennifer, thank you for giving yourself time. Yeah, that's beautiful, right? Like, there is a reaction here. Is this appropriate for me to share this? I don't know. Let me wait 3 minutes here, see how it lands, see how it develops. And then in 3 minutes, maybe I'm going to share. Maybe it doesn't matter anymore.
Yep.
Right? That's beautiful.
Okay, the third C, people, is callousness.
I love this one.
The more we talk, the more of our clients' process we are taking them from. So while they're in the process, if we're talking, we're pulling them out of their own process.
I think that we all have felt this when we are in social settings and this person is talking and this person is talking and we are like, okay, this person completely monopolized the conversation and not letting other people speak. We do this with our clients. We monopolize the space. And then we are not letting them do the processing.
I have a friend who he jokingly says if somebody monopolizes the conversation, "Hi, have you met me? My name's Edgewise. Mind if I get a word in?" So you can all remember that.
Amy, that's part of that whole communication patterns that I see with people. Is that it is almost stream of consciousness. And I don't want to make these big, broad generalizations, but coaching thousands of people over the last 13 years, you just hear it. And I am kind of pointing to a younger generation when I express this, but it is stream of consciousness. It's just, and where are they going? And there's no opportunity to Time out. You lost me back here.
Yeah. And I mean, remember here what we've said here today, that they are responsible for defining all that, not you. Your succinct questions will get them to distill it all.
By being succinct, we indirectly teach the client how to be succinct. Oftentimes I hear students and mentees talk about verbose clients, and then we listen to the recordings, and the coach is being as verbose or similarly verbose to the client. So you are emphasizing that pattern of speech. When we become more succinct, then the client is, oh, how can I be more succinct too?
You guys have referred a number of times to the client's process and not stealing that. And I can absolutely honor that statement. By the same token, reflecting on the unique nature of each coachee. Mary's worked with a bunch of younger folks. I've worked with younger folks and people who are earlier in their career or who haven't had more training to find these kinds of awarenesses. But it feels like a great outcome for a client is for them to develop some of that process, right? And so it's this meta world of staying out of their process to help them develop their process.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a great term, Joe. That's perfect.
It goes back to the more we paddle, the less work they do.
Yeah.
It goes back to that.
And forcing them to say, what are you really saying here? It goes a lot farther to keep asking that in different ways than it does, you talk too much. I find myself not hearing you. I mean, that's a ball peen hammer versus, okay, what are you really saying here? Help me out here. That's a whole different thing that develops the client and moves the client forward. All right, are we ready for the next one? I know you're hanging on my every word for these C's, aren't you? Comfort. We're not comfortable with the silence. We're not comfortable with the pauses. We're not comfortable letting the space happen, letting voids happen. Just straight up comfort. I don't know how much we have to belabor this point because you've all learned about it. And again, a muscle to develop. And best to err on the side of caution with this one. Be more silent than you think you should be.
I'd like to offer an observation. I'd say it for myself, but I think it probably applies more broadly. Is there's something about the online Zoom experience, the digital experience, where, when we're in person, it's so much more comfortable to create the silence with someone. It's just a given. You're just present with them. And the second this camera goes on, there's this feeling of like, all right, I gotta be, and now it's my turn. And part of it, there is, that momentary delay, right? In the Zoom. I don't, it depends on what your system is, right? But there's some small Zoom delay, and that contributes as well. So you start playing with the silence. Like, what does the silence mean? I find that there's a game within the Zoom space that we're in sometimes.
That's interesting.
I think that has to be with technology, right? It's a screen, and we go on TV, and it's bum 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 all the time. People are talking, and radio cannot have a second of silence. So we are used to this, and there is the technology here. Somehow we get into that. I think it goes back to the muscle to really redefine the technology, redefine the space, and redefine for ourselves, redefine for the client. It's the two of us. And
that's so interesting too. I'm sorry, Elise. For me to hear you say that, David, because both Elise and I coached over the phone for 15 years. We didn't have Zoom.
Mm.
And so it's a whole different thing with the silence on the phone, because you can't even see that the person's contemplating, thinking, whatever. So it fine tunes that muscle because you're feeling it versus seeing it. So it's really interesting to hear that from you. I would have never guessed it myself.
Sorry, I really had to challenge myself because I coached purely over the phone and then Zoom.
Yeah.
And I was more comfortable on the phone. And yet,
Oh.
you know, you think, well, I can see somebody now, but yeah, but so it's building that different muscle up and challenging yourself in a different way. But interesting.
And what I find interesting, Claire, about it is that because there is a camera involved, there's this propensity behind it. David, I think, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a great point. All right. So let's move to number 5. I like this one. Confusion. When you're not clear on your intentions about what you want to say. That's where the word salads come from. That your intention, and again, this is not a coaching book, but it's intention with your words. Right?
We are not clear what we want to say, so we keep saying, we keep talking. We start a question and we're not sure of the question, and then we speak a question, and in the middle of the question we realize that that's not the question, and then we start cleaning up the question, and then we create more questions. And the client is over there like, what is happening?
Yeah, and they'll even go as far to say, you know, can you ask that in a different way, or can you ask that again? Right? And now we know we're making salad. So that's, and that our intention may not be clear enough. So that's the thing to reflect on when you find yourself having those types of situations in your coaching sessions. Again, back to intention.
That's why silence is so important, so that we are clear, we are not confused of what we are going to say.
Okay, the next one is, unless anybody want to throw in on that before I move? Okay. Next one is complication. If it's too simple, we may feel we aren't being effective. Our job is to make it simple for the client. Again, back to that, am I bringing value? Is the client going to see this as valuable? Am I succeeding as a coach? Am I keeping them engaged in this relationship? This is where we start to way overcomplicate our language. And again, the focus is off the client on that one. We have kind of covered a lot of these already.
It kind of seems like that one's tied to confidence too,
Yep.
because they're both like about kind of expertise,
Yep.
you know.
Value and perceive. Yeah.
If it's too simple, it's not valuable. If it's too simple, I'm not showing how smart I am.
The last one, before Mary's added one, is carelessness. We must be intentional, and every word must be intentional. So are we just getting sloppy and careless? Are we getting too familiar in conversation without moving it forward? It's easy to it can happen very easily, right? So again, it's back to that intention. What am I doing with these words? It within the context of coaching, the framework of coaching, and the competencies of coaching. What am I doing with these words?
Yeah, what this shows up for me a lot in mentoring. The weasel words, right? Right. Yes.
Which I'm terrible at personally. I will tell on myself.
Yeah, and I say this because, especially the mm-hms and the okays and the yeses, oftentimes when we do that in coaching, we are not even conscious that we are saying these words or producing these sounds. And I always say to mentees, it's not that you cannot do that. there are moments that it's very appropriate, but the point here is the intentionality. Are we doing this with a purpose because we are intentional? I am going to say yes here, or am I doing this out of a habit that I'm not even conscious of it? We want to be conscious when we say that, so that when we say right, we are making a point on that, or when we say yes, there is an intentionality there, but it's not just a habit that is actually being intrusive to the client's process. Make sense? Linda.
I want to ask Amy a question going back to what the point she made about when you listen to coaches and you kind of wish that they spoke the way they normally speak when you mentor them. I wonder, for me, I think there's such an allegiance and loyalty to the process that sometimes I think that impacts the choice of language that I make. And so I'm just curious from your experience, Amy, what would you want to hear differently in the language? What might be an example?
Well, I'm going to come full circle back to Mary's 8th C of constraint with this. And I don't want to put a rule in your head, Linda. What I would rather see when I say speak normal as you would is you. You would do you, I do me. Mine is sometimes laced with profanity. So there, like, but it's that you do you. When you bring your authentic self into the coaching, it empowers clients. And that means your vulnerabilities. I screw up, like that's behind everything. When I bring my authentic self in the coaching, it took me years to learn to do that. Years and years and a lot of work, and I'm still working on it. Right. But see, I did it. I don't want to say, I said earlier to David, when the example I use is, to maybe a tough dynamic to just go, what's up with that? Yeah, just something simple that is naturally me, how I would talk to people as me. The authenticity is more important than the words. The authenticity, what's behind the words, is the most important thing. And this brevity and the what to say becomes easy when you emphasize the authenticity.
It goes back to
you.
point number 2, right? The word number 2, confidence. When we are having a conversation with a friend of ours, if it's a real friend, right? We are not concerned about proving ourselves. And I think that we start making word salads in coaching because when we start trying to prove, when we start trying to guide, when we start trying to maneuver the coaching conversation, letting go of that and really being authentic, as Amy is saying, will support us in simplifying. I don't need to take ownership here. The client is going to take charge of the process.
So those are all the C's from the book. We've got a few minutes left. Is there anything else anybody wants to ask or bring into the room before? Because I'd like to hear from all of you what you're taking away from today. But I want to make sure we come to a stop where everybody feels expressed or asks what they need to ask. Nothing? This was a lot today. So.
It was really good.
I have a comment. This hit me as you were wrapping up and listening to this. So my former life, I was an engineer, and a successful engineer for 30 years. And it hit me just now that I was a good engineer and I had good soft skills, but I could duck underneath some of those and still be a good engineer. And this just sort of flashed in my head. It comes as no surprise after working with Elias and Amy for a couple of years, but the flash still was, in order to be an effective coach, I have to be, an effective human. And so, I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody's gonna be like, yeah, that's pretty obvious, Dave. But that's the impact that I take away from this. That separation is the part that I could be a great engineer and a lousy person in theory, but I can't do that here. And so the stretch is so much bigger, especially in transition. So thanks for this group, because these little prime hours are so precious, because it gives you that extra edge that you don't get out of training and you don't get out of practicing. That's it. Thanks.
Oh, David, I'm gonna make a
Got
little
my heart.
bit of what you said, and I'm gonna make a video just like
Okay.
that is
Can we splash that across social media, please?
beautiful wisdom right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
We
definitely.
say we say in supervision, coaching supervision, we say who you are is how you supervise. I would say who you are is how you coach. And that's why we say that coaching is not something that we do. Coaching is who we are, for sure. And it's right there in what we are saying here.
There's actually a book, Claire Pedrick, MCC.
Yes.
Yeah, The Human Behind the Coach. Huge promoting with it. But absolutely, what a lovely, succinct way to say it.
Sorry to interrupt there, Clara. I'm pressed with time here, so that's why I'm pushing here. I apologize. I want to say one thing here to punctuate this conversation. In my work mentoring coaches, and I am working right now with a couple of people preparing for their MCC. If we master language, oh my gosh, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's a huge chunk of the coaching process. It's a huge chunk. There is so much beauty in language. If we are able to really master our language, we are going to, our coaching is going to grow exponentially. So I highly emphasize you all to be very mindful of it and build that muscle, as Amy said earlier. And I had one more point and I cannot remember, and I will shut up. So
well, I'm going to add on to it, Elise, because I just want to say in our training at Prime, we are tough on our students now about this right from the get-go in level 1. This brevity piece, the succinctness, the intention behind the words. We go right in on this with our training now in a tough way and very rigorous, because we have recognized the level of importance and the efficacy of the coaching. So it's
I remember my point.
Okay.
Language is something that we practice everywhere.
Yeah.
So when you open your mouth to have a conversation with your friend, to say something, that's the moment that you can already practice your language right there.
What are you taking away, you guys? Briefly, very briefly.
A lot.
Okay, good, Mary. Anyone else?
I'm getting more curious about my client's process.
Great.
As I've worked on my foundations, it makes it easier to just be who I am and let them do their work.
Great, Vince. Anyone else?
Mindfulness and plain speak.
Yeah, love that.
Intention and language.
Okay, well, we're going to want to hear from you guys next time you show up, how this is going for you, or shoot us an email or something, because we covered a lot of ground today, and we will revisit this topic at some point, or a variation of this topic. But I just want to applaud all of you for your honesty, your vulnerability in this conversation, and for all that you added into it. Because it's important that we can all feel like we can, I opened my kimono a little. I've got my own bad habits with language too. And so it's good that we have these honest conversations to know that we all struggle sometimes with this stuff. And I think that's the value of these discussions. So I'm taking away everything everyone of you said today.
And
Elise?
quick feedback. This format's awesome. This
Good format. Really good format.
Great.
richer. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, for saying that.
We have a couple of announcements. First of all, remember that we will not have Prime Hour in December, but we will have Prime Hour in January, and January is going to be January 16th. So mark your calendars at 1 p.m. Eastern. So it's 1 hour later than we usually do, okay? So January 16th at 1 p.m. Eastern. We would love to hear if you have a topic. Send us an email. Let us know what you would like to discuss. We will see how we can do this. But we will also be using some of the episodes of Prime Space and bringing them back so that it's not just Elias or Amy speaking. It's you also bringing your thoughts about that particular topic as well. Other things is that we have our level 1 and level 2 program open registration to start in January. At the beginning of the year. And then if you register before November 20th, you are able to pay the tuition in 3 installments so that there is a break there for you. So for you to be able to know that. Amy, anything else we need to share with them?
I think that's it, Elias. I think we're good to go. So everybody have wonderful holidays, Thanksgiving here in the US and over the December, whatever you celebrate. I hope you have wonderful holidays and time with friends and family.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.